et bienvenue au Centre Culturel Irlandais. Et je suis ravie ce soir d'accueillir Emilie Pine, auteure de Notes to Self, paru en français aux éditions Delcourt le mois dernier. Et ce recueil d'essais est devenu très vite un phénomène littéraire. Et je suis ravie aussi que Emilie reviendra au Centre culturel irlandais où elle va être en résidence ici chez nous pendant un mois, pendant le mois de mai. So you'll be with us next May for the month. Emilie est aussi professeure à l'Université College Dublin et spécialiste de théâtre contemporain. Alors, nous accueillons Marguerite Capelle, traductrice du livre, et Emmanuelle Heurtebize, vous êtes là, de la Maison Delcourt. On a déjà eu le plaisir de présenter un livre irlandais de Delcourt au mois de mai de cette année. C'était le premier livre de Anne Griffin de paraître en français. Et c'était une très belle occasion. Je suis ravie de pouvoir voilà, effectivement. Et j'ai aussi le grand plaisir d'accueillir Cliona Ni Riordain, une grande amie du Centre culturel irlandais qui est professeure de littérature irlandaise à l'université Sorbonne Nouvelle. Donc, je passe maintenant la parole directement à Emmanuelle Heurtebize.
Bonsoir, je suis ravie de revenir pour la deuxième fois avec un auteur cher à mon cœur, parce que nous sommes une maison d'édition qui a à peine 1 an et demi, donc c'est quand même... je suis ravie de publier en France le livre de Emilie Pine, qui a été pour moi une vraie rencontre. Parfois, quand on lit... on cherche une histoire, un divertissement. Et pour moi, dès que j'ai lu ce livre, j'ai eu l'impression de rencontrer quelqu'un, d'entendre une voix qui résonnait en moi, qui aussi m'a énormément bouleversée, qui m'a poussée à aller dans mes retranchements. C'est un livre qui ouvre un dialogue, qui permet aussi l'écoute. Je trouve que c'est un livre très important. Ce que j'aime aussi de ce livre, c'est que c'est un livre qui a été écrit par accident. Puisque ce n'était pas destiné à être un livre au départ. Elle a commencé à écrire un premier texte. Et on sent justement cette urgence et on sent aussi une énergie qui est sous ce texte qui nous porte pendant toute la lecture. Et je sais que c'est aussi le début d'un grand chemin d'écrivain. Et j'attends impatiemment de lire le prochain livre d'Emilie. Je suis aussi tellement heureuse qu'il ait eu ce succès dans le monde entier. J'espère qu'il va trouver autant d'écho en France, à la fois auprès des lectrices, mais aussi des lecteurs, parce que je trouve que c'est un livre qui permet aussi d'ouvrir un débat entre les genres. Voilà. Merci Emilie d'être venue à Paris pour le lancement de ce livre.
So the last time I met Emilie Pine was on a bus. And as I was about to learn on reading Notes to Self, the bus plays a very important part in the coming into life or in the coming into being of this book. And it was a bus that was taking her from UCD, her life in the academic bubble, into real life in Dublin. And as it turns out, the bus was the literal vehicle in which she scribbled the notes to herself on bus tickets, amongst other things, which became this volume of essays. And I know as an academic, I'm hugely envious of the fact that she has been able to make this jump from writing books that maybe 20 specialists in the world will read to writing a book that has become, and I'm being generous by saying 20, writing this book that has met such an enormous success, that started with Tramp Press, and that has brought her really world fame, because she's in the pages of British Vogue, she's being interviewed in the New York Times, and I'm very happy to welcome her here to Paris. It's an immense pleasure and an honor. And so I'm going to hand over to Emilie, who's going to read and going to show you and make you understand why you need to run out and buy this book.
Thank you so much. Oh, sorry. Thank you so much, Cliona. It's amazing to be here with someone who I've known for quite a long time, Cliona, through our shared academic lives, but with people who I've never met before through Delcourt Edition, and just want to thank everybody at Delcourt for turning English into French, which is this amazing alchemy. And the greatest gift that a writer could have. So it's a real privilege to be here, and thank you so much to the Centre for hosting us. I would love to read from the very beautiful translation by Marguerite, but I would kill it. So I'm going to read from the English edition. And I'm going to read a bit from Notes on Intemperance, which was the first essay that I wrote. And I think I caught the word accidental when Emmanuelle was talking, because I almost wrote the book accidentally. And that was, I had this other writing life where I was writing as an academic, and the anger was just building for all the things that I couldn't say. And it built and it built until in 2013, something happened that just broke the seal. And that's the bit that I'm going to read about. By the time we find him, he has been lying in a small pool of his own shit for several hours. Corfu General Hospital is bewildering. The foyer is crowded with patients smoking, and there is no sign of an information or registration desk. I text him to ask where he is, but get no response. Somehow, like bloodhounds, we track him to the 5th floor. He lies weakly in the bed. It is evening now, and he says he hasn't seen a nurse or doctor since midday. He said he needs a bedpan. My sister and I have been traveling for over 24 hours, and neither of us has slept. Call the nurse, I tell him. He says he did, but nothing happened. We'll do it again. He holds the call bell in his hand and presses repeatedly. After a while, a harassed-looking nurse appears, shouting at him, at us. I feel guilty for not speaking Greek. With useless gestures, I point to the man in the bed. I try to signal that he needs a bedpan to be washed and the sheets changed. None of this makes any impression. The nurse says something else, throws up her hands and leaves. He looks at us in desperation. I ask my sister to stay with him, and I go out into the corridor. I can see only other patients and their families. I go to the nurses' station, but there is no one there. As I walk away at a loss for what to do, a woman speaks to me. When I don't respond, she asks me in English if I am all right. And I latch on, asking her if she knows where the nurses are. There are no nurses, she tells me. An older man leans over. Without your family here, you die. This will become a mantra to us during the time that we spend in Greece, trying to nurse our father back to life. Very quickly, we learn just how understaffed the hospital is. There are no doctors after 2 p.m., and after 5 p.m., there is only one nurse per ward. The English-speaking local tells me that I must take care of my father. She explains gently where to buy incontinence pads and wipes and paper towels. I barely take this in, but go back into the room my father's crisis status has secured him and explain to my sister the state of play. She looks at me in disbelief. She is standing at the head of Dad's bed and fixing his pillows. I realize that I have hardly spoken to him, though I have traveled across Europe to be here. You're alive anyway, I say. He nods. He looks very small in the bed, small and lost. I decide that this can't be the way it is. There must be someone in authority, somewhere in this hospital. I go back into the corridor and ask the sympathetic woman if she will help me to find a doctor. She talks quickly with her family, then walks off down the corridor. We take a lift to another floor, but there are no doctors there. We get back in the lift and try again. We do this over and over, down and down, until we're in the basement, searching its corridors. Eventually, we find the blood donation clinic with its attending medic. I take his hand and ask him to see my father. I tell him that I don't understand, that my father is alone in a room and there are no doctors. I tell him that we just need someone to explain it all, that what I really want is someone to tell me what to do. The jolt of adrenaline which propelled me this far has suddenly gone, and all I feel is empty. I just keep standing there, asking the doctor to come to see my father. Extremely reluctantly, he leaves the clinic. We take the lift back up to the 5th floor. He's a doctor, I say, with more hope than certainty. He takes Dad's chart, looks it over, nodding, then says, "Your father has lost a lot of blood. He will need transfusions. You must give blood." It seems easier to agree, though I had hoped for a more thorough examination. In the weeks that follow, this will be the pattern that our time takes, hours of waiting, followed by a struggle to attract official attention, only to be told something that we already know. After years of teaching Beckett plays, I am finally living in one. When I was writing the book, I realized that there were things that I had to fill in, things that people wouldn't know about the backstory of my family, but also about what I was trying to describe, which is that my father was an alcoholic and that in 2013 he went into liver failure, and that this came out after 4 decades of alcoholism. So when the publishers, the editors, asked me to write something, this is what I wrote. It is hard to love an addict. Not only practically difficult in the picking up after them and the handling of those aspects of life they're not able for themselves, but metaphysically hard. It feels like bashing yourself against a wall, not just your head, but your whole self. It makes your heart hard, caught between endless ultimatums and radical acceptance. The person who loves the addict exhausts and renews their love on a daily basis. I used to push myself to reject him, to walk away, failing each time. I oscillated between caring for the man who was afflicted with this terrible disease and attempting to protect myself from the emotional fallout of having an alcoholic father. It took years of refusing him empathy before I realized that the only person I was hurting was myself. And now, as he lies in this hospital bed, wasted and yellow with sickness, a sickness which he has deliberately and consistently sought out, as his heart and blood and kidney functions are minutely monitored by these machines, I look at him and wonder, how can I love him? How can I save him when I can't even reach him? And in a way, me writing this essay and writing this book was a way to answer that question. And I felt the first draft of this essay ended on quite a depressing note, with us back in the hospital. And I gave it to a friend actually whose mother is also an alcoholic. And he said, "It's too dark, you can't leave me here." And I thought, maybe I can't leave myself there either. And part of writing the book was also about looking at the life behind the book and trying to figure out, well, how can I write myself a happy ending? How can I find the narrative that I want, that I want to live, but also the narrative that I want to tell about myself? So this is my attempt. When I was a child and Dad was beginning to struggle with the depression that has characterized his adult life, he made me promise that when I grew up, I would not become a writer. I solemnly said the words, but inwardly, I knew that I would do the opposite. Because what my dad really taught me, despite himself perhaps, is that writing is a way of making sense of the world, a way of processing, of possessing thought and emotion, a way of making something worthwhile out of pain. And so, inevitably, as I sat beside him in those hospital rooms in Greece, I wondered how I would describe the room and the man in the bed as if it and he were a scene. I wondered how to tell the story of blood, of nurses and gloves, of doctors and waiting. I wondered who was the protagonist, him or me. And I wondered how I would, if I could, use these notes as a way of understanding the larger story of me and my dad. I finally finished this essay. I phoned Dad to tell him that I have written about my memories of his health crisis. He makes a non-committal sound. Then he asks me to email the piece to him. After I press send, I sit at my desk in a fretful silence, worrying that he will be upset by what I have written. I worry that he will criticize it. I worry that he will dispute its truth. Most of all, I worry that by writing it, by sending it, by hoping to publish it, I will break the fragile calm that we have built between us in the years since he stopped drinking. 20 minutes later, I have my answer. He has written 2 short lines. It is beautiful and brave. And I realize that here is a moment when my father has surprised me. I thought we had lost the capacity for surprise. But we are not lost. Not just yet. Our relationship may be an unending kind of story, a chain of unalterable moments, from arguments in bars to vigils at hospital bedsides. But it is also, just as powerfully, an ever-changing conversation between 2 people, father and daughter, a conversation that we are both grateful is not over. These days, sometimes he'll call and I am busy and he is self-involved and I snap and he snaps back and I hang up. Sometimes he'll call and he'll tell me his news, some village gossip that I can barely follow, but I listen anyway. And when I yawn, he laughs and I laugh too. Sometimes he'll call and I don't feel like talking. Sometimes he'll call and it is just so good to hear his voice. And every time he calls, my heart races. My heart will always race. Thank you.
Have you thought about turning it into a stage show?
Yeah, my family would love that.
It is such, I mean, you read it so wonderfully and you manage to do what you do in the book. You create that sense of intimacy. I think everybody in the room felt that.
Well, when I did it on the page, the joke of the title, in English anyway, is that I was writing for myself because I didn't imagine other people reading it. And sometimes I would come down from the desk, which is in this little room upstairs, and I would come down and I would say, no one is going to want to read this book. And my partner would say, don't worry about that. You just write it. Let the publishers do the publishing, right? Turns out that's what they're good at. And don't think about it and write it as if it were for yourself. And I certainly think with the first draft of anything, that's how you have to write, is no censorship, just everything. And that's hard, right? Being honest with yourself, even, is probably the hardest thing. It's way easier to lie to ourselves. So, in a strange way, when the intimacy was something I was trying to build with myself.
Trying to allow yourself to write it.
Yes. And so when I wrote that essay, in 2014. And sorry, I should have begun with this. My dad is still alive. That's the plot spoiler out of the way. So he came out of intensive care, and he came off the liver transplant list, and he hasn't had a drink since February 2013, which we are all very grateful for. But even after he was okay, I had all of these conflicted emotions, and the only way I could deal with them, it was like a visceral thing. It was like taking them out of my body and putting them onto the page. And I never intended to publish it. It was not what I thought. And it was only my partner stumbled across it. I'm really messy. And he was trying to tidy these towers of paper, and he found them, and he started reading, and he said, it's actually very good. Better than the stuff you usually write.
Ouch.
No, because I respect his judgment so much, and it's amazing how it takes somebody else telling you that your work is good for you to start to value your own. And it was the same. I had a meeting with the original publishers, Tramp Press, and they said, we really like your style. And I said, I don't have a style. And they said, no, you do. And I said, no, that's just what it sounds like in my brain. And they said, as if I were needed multiple explanations. They said, yeah, that's called style. And so that was just a kind of revolution where you start to take yourself seriously and pay attention and say, yes, okay, maybe this is valuable. And at the beginning, I used to say that it felt like being given permission to speak, permission to write. Because they said, would you write a book? And I said, well, what would I write a book about? And they said, anything you like. I was like, okay. And it set it free. And now, it was like being given permission. I cannot believe that I was waiting to be given permission. So here, for everyone in the room, this is your permission slip. If you have a story, if you have something you want to do, go do it. Don't wait, do it.
That's wonderful advice. You talk about, I think it's a volcanic impulse.
Yeah, this was something I stole from another life writer, where he said, you wouldn't do it if you didn't have to. And I said, yeah, it feels like a compulsion. And he said, it's like a volcano. And it rang exactly true with me. When somebody says something, you think, yeah, that's exactly how I feel. And it feels like the pressure built up to such a point, and then it has to come out. And it could have come out in lots of ways. It could have come out in rage, but it came out in writing, so I'm grateful. And it feels like a kind of lava, this unstoppable flow. Like, I wrote the book really fast. Mm-hmm. And some of the essays, I remember writing, we were on a plane and I couldn't stop, and we're landing and the air hostess is saying, you have to put up your tray table. And I was like, okay, put up the tray table, and I'm still trying to write. That sense of it has to be said, it has to come out. And I think in the process realized I had been telling the story to myself in my head for years because it came out. I then spent months editing the shit out of it. So, I wrote it really fast, and then I spent the same amount of time
shaping it.
And so both those processes are really important.
And the shape is really wonderful. I mean, there are 6 essays.
It's short.
And
I think that's a good thing. Short. I like short books. As a reader, I like short books, right?
And at the same time, I mean, they're so interconnected. We were talking earlier with Emmanuelle, and she talked about the notion of fragmented story, the notion of fragmented memoir.
Yeah, so I really didn't want to write a memoir. Because a memoir feels like a narrative of progress, You have a beginning, a middle, and a ta-da, here I am at the end. And I'm not finished, so I'm not at the end. But also, I don't feel that my life fits that pattern. I feel like, so the essays are all thematic. So the first essay is about my dad, and particularly about what happens when someone goes into liver failure. The second essay is called The Baby Years, L'année de la baby. And I got that wrong, I think.
We get the idea.
It was about the years that my partner and I spent trying to become parents. And then, there's an essay about working. There's an essay, it's fun, it's better than that makes it sound. There's an essay called Notes on Bleeding and Other Crimes about having a woman's body. So I like that idea of your life having a thematic shape rather than a chronological shape. It's not always the order of events that defines us. It's how we build a story about ourselves through things that seem to associate together. And so it doesn't have a chronological format, and it is in fragments, it's in pieces, because that makes sense to me. But it's funny, because I was having a conversation with my friend who said, oh no, I feel like my life is linear. I feel like my life is one event after another. And so everybody has different conceptions of themselves in time, and we need different literary forms to take account of that diversity.
Mm-hmm. You talk about, I think in one of the essays or interviews you gave, you talk about Melissa Phoebos and her influence, and how somebody says to her, go back, write it again, you're not telling the truth. Did you force yourself to do that?
Yes. And so these were some of the more difficult conversations which I had with the editors at Tramp Press, and also with my convenient in-house editor, my partner, who was the first and most thorough reader and editor of the book. And those conversations were where there were gaps. Sometimes they were gaps because I just didn't think, oh, somebody else needs to know this. And sometimes they were gaps because the thing was really difficult, right? And you can set out to be honest and still have qualms and still have boundaries. And whoever I was having this conversation with would say, this isn't really working. And I would say, well, it's really about this. And they would say, you have to write that. And that's why editing is what makes good writing. Why editorial conversations are actually very brave conversations, because somebody has to be brave to say it to you as a writer, and then you have to listen, because it is also the voice that's inside you, the little voice that says, I know I have to do this thing, I don't want to do it, and then you're thinking, oh, I signed a contract. No, the sense of, and actually the contract is the contract with yourself, really, not with the publisher. And you realize that if you are going to do this thing, you have to do it. And people ask me, did you think about publishing it under a pseudonym? Or did you think about publishing it as fiction? And I'm kind of amazed by the question, because for me, the only way to do it, the only point of doing it is to do it real, to do it as nonfiction, to do it as myself, to do it fully, right? And people also say, oh, is there anything in it that you regret? No. It's
Edith Piaf moment, je ne regrette rien.
Yeah, and it comes back to that point, right? I wrote it almost accidentally, except that's not true. I wrote it really deliberately, right? I own this as a decision. And that, like, writing can be a really empowering thing, but owning it is the empowering action behind that.
And what about the others? Because, you're writing for yourself. As Seamus Heaney famously says in a poem to a terrorist who asks him to write a poem for them. You're writing it for yourself, but what about your readers? Did you think about them?
I'm loving this. I'm like Piaf and Heaney. This is going well.
We'll get another couple in before the night
or
is
else
out.
I'm the terrorist. I'm not sure. No, because I knew that my family would read it in draft form. And my family are really the only people who I imagined reading it. And how to put this, which I couldn't think about them, because then I would write it to please them. Mm-hmm. And we spend so much of our lives sanitizing our narratives to please other people. And good writing is not written to please other people. And so I had to put honesty above being nice. Sorry, Mum. And I also gave it to them to read in draft form. So they read it almost a year before it came out. And that was really important. You know, there's this thing you either ask for permission or you ask for forgiveness. And for me, it was important to ask for permission in advance. I don't know what I would have done had they refused that, but I luckily didn't have to answer that question. I know what I would have done. But, you know, they were imagined and also blocked out at the same time.
And you thanked them very kindly at the end in your acknowledgements.
Well, it's the least I could do, really.
But you also...
I mean, my mother would say, you know, people normally wait till their parents are dead, Emily, before publishing this kind of thing.
Well, I think Blake Morrison says that. He has a memoir called When Did You Last See Your Father? And he talks about waiting until his father is dead, and his poor mother knows that she's in line for it next. So at least you have it all out there and said in the open.
I do, and that's, you know, that essay that I read from about my dad, that actually it has become part of the conversation in my family, and it has become a way. Until my father read that essay, one of the other things he said, he rang me after the email. That doesn't make it in. But he phoned me and he said, I had no idea. I had no idea it was hard for you having an alcoholic father. I didn't think it bothered you at all. And I rang my sister straight away. I was like, can you believe this? And I realized that we had never said it. And I had assumed everybody knew it. But so things are unspoken, not just out of fear or taboo or stigma, but because we never articulate them. And I'd begged my dad to stop drinking, but I'd never said, this is why. I thought it was obvious. And so, you know, in a strange way, my dad and I now have, I won't say a better relationship because we've always been really close, but a more honest relationship. And that takes work in a different way. And I said this to someone the other day and it sounded good, so I'm going to say it again. But I feel like as a writer, you know, there's that thing, you know, that the curse of any family is when a child becomes a writer. And there is that thing that as a writer, you are trying to make something. But actually, you're also breaking something, right? You're breaking the fiction that families run on, which makes you not so popular.
What I also think is very important for me reading it as an Irish woman is the way in which you put your body front and center, and you have all of these conversations about the body, which I think for many Irish people of a certain generation, be they male or female, they didn't want to have. They didn't want to think about their bodies. They were disembodied. And I think possibly as an academic, as an intellectual, not alone do you have your upbringing and your country to blame for it, but you also have your métier in a sense. And that's one of the things I admire most is the presence of the body in the book.
I feel that the critic must not have a body. I mean, so I teach theatre, and if you lecture in theatre, you end up going to the theatre a lot. And a lot of theatres have really uncomfortable seats. And I have a bad back as a result of going to the theatre a lot. And this is never mentioned in anything I ever write about the theatre. And yet it is one of the most ever-present things that I'm feeling. And that division of the body and the brain in criticism is I'm deeply suspicious of it. Because it's not true then. We are so affected by what we are feeling and thinking. We think through our bodies as well, as if, there's this dualism. I don't buy it. And yet I have replicated it in my work. Not anymore. But I think you're right. There's a larger cultural issue here. I don't know where it comes from. Do you know where it comes from? I mean, is it just Catholicism?
I think it's Catholicism mixed with Victorianism and a bit of Puritanism. Thrown in for good measure.
What a cocktail, right? Yeah. And so here's the thing. So I mean, one of the middle essays in the book is called Notes on Bleeding and Other Crimes, and it starts off with talking about menstruation. And the reason I had to write it was kind of like a dare to yourself, where you know the thing that you don't want to talk about. So you make yourself do it. And the joke is that I could never say the word period. And it's there, I write about it. And I don't know where it came from, why I decided that this was like the world's worst word, but could not get the syllables out of my mouth. And then I was in a bookshop in Scotland, in a feminist bookshop in Scotland, and she says, we're going to, the woman who ran it, and there was an event, and she said, we're going to help you out. And maybe we should do it tonight. And she said, we're just all going to chant period together. And it's okay, we don't have to do it tonight. and as it started, I was thinking, I am dying. I am like, this is hell. I'm dying. Why did I write this stupid book, right? And then as we went on and on and on, by the time we got to like 12 or something, I thought, I am not scared of this word anymore. And this is a long way of saying that the only way to confront the things that we are scared of or that are stigmatized or that are taboo is to say the words, right? To use the words. And I say it to my nephew. I say, use your words, when he wants to describe things. We have this enormous vocabulary. Let's use it.
And we don't have to say things like private parts or down there.
Down there, you're down there's. Yeah. I'm feeling bad.
Yeah. But what strikes me is that it's also, I mean, we perhaps as Irish people we tend to think it's uniquely Irish, but I think it's also very much universal. I know that in French schools, girls are sometimes told to say to their teachers, "Je suis indisposée." To say that they're on their period and they have to leave the class. And we had a poetry reading with the poet Dirani Griefa, who has a poem called On Bleeding. And the male who introduced her said, this is a poem about women of a certain age and the blood they lose at a time of the month, in French. and so I think that, we as prudish, confused Irish people think it's all about us, our oppressed Catholic Victorian childhoods. But I mean,
turns out you're just as messed up as we are.
So I think I actually think that, I mean, I love all of the essays, but I would really love you to take that one out. I mean, can I talk to your publisher? And maybe turn it into a little leaflet that should be distributed in schools to girls and boys and teachers.
Yeah, it's strange. So I was talking to someone I know at work, and she was saying that her son was leaving, I don't know how it corresponds to the French school system, but is 12 years old, so is going from junior school to senior school. And they all got, as their final day in junior school, they all got little bags, kind of goodie bags, and then with, little cards saying good luck in high school and so on. And the girls all got sanitary products, but not the boys. And she was saying, she went into the teacher and said, the boys should get it as well. And the school was horrified at the idea that boys would be exposed to something as shocking as, you know, cotton wool. And in a particular shape. But exactly, and it's strange because some part of it, when I was writing it, I thought, this must be so out of date. Because, you know, this surely this is over. Surely the terms of debate have moved on so much further than they had 30 years ago when I was getting my period for the first time. And yet, we still have this bifurcation of the sexes into those who know about bleeding and those who don't. And it's such an impoverishment for boys. I mean, it puts all of the ownership and responsibility on girls, but it weakens boys' hold on the world. That's a terrible thing to do to them. I'm like, you know, Gloria Steinem says, patriarchy is really bad for men.
Toxic masculinity.
Yeah. The clue is in the title. Toxic.
Yeah. The other thing that you talk about, I think it's in the final essay, where you talk about yourself in the workplace and about no longer wanting to accept a certain amount of things in the workplace. Did that come from the writing process, or were there other triggers like Me Too or things like that?
So the final essay is the most contemporaneous. So it was happening as I was writing the book. And so I started out with this idea and I wanted to write an essay about being a professional woman, because I didn't think there were many essays about being a professional woman, and it's what I spend most of my time doing. And I would really like to read other people talking about what it's like working every day. And so then I thought, right, well, just write it for yourself, Emily. And I also wanted it to be a happy ending to the book, because the book goes through some difficult parts of my life. And I thought, oh, I'll just go, look, I've got a great job now and I'm really happy. And I sent it to my mother and she said, God, Emily, for a happy ending, it's very depressing. She has all the best lines. And she's right, because in looking at my job, again, through through writing about it, you have to be a bit dispassionate to write. You have to try and look clearly. And through writing about it, I started to analyze it and to think about the things that I had taken for granted for so long. And that includes the ways in which I had internalized lots of really anti-women ideas, because I had really grown up in a form of kind of second wave feminism, which was all about equal pay, as if you achieve equal pay, then that's it, we're all done. But all of the stuff about bodies and equality, like different but equal, I had somehow not really taken it on board. And so there I was as like a kind of mini female patriarch wandering around. And those attitudes and ideas are you're forced to confront them when you hit a wall with them. And for me, the wall was that I had a miscarriage and I was at work and realized I was completely unable to share this. I mean, not that you go around sharing it, right? Because it's emotionally far too difficult. But I felt completely unable to reconcile my personal life and my professional life. And I began to think something is broken there, that we have to separate our lives in such a way. And then the joke is that it's a hilarious joke. My partner always says, Emily, you need to think about the meaning of the word hilarious, because it doesn't mean what you think it means. Right? That the collection begins with my dad being an alcoholic and it ends with me being a workaholic. So I'm a bit like my dad, I'm afraid. But the happy ending is I'm okay now. That I had invested so much of myself in my job, because in my professional life, because my personal life didn't go in the direction I wanted it to. And again, it just forces those kind of crisis moments where you think, is this how I want to live my life? And writing was the way for me to pose that question and to begin to answer that question as well with a no. That is not how I want to live my life. And to write about how I wanted to change it. And it took me a really long time to get there. I'm still getting there, to be honest. But I do think if my dad had to stop drinking, then I have to confront the thing that I have to stop doing too.
And at the same time, one of the things that I admire about the essays, I think, comes from your professional life. In other words, you manage to organize the essays in such a way that you lead your reader into the crisis, and we're in there with you in the tumult of all of the things that you're telling us. And at the end, you manage to stand back from it. And I wonder how much the standing back and the analysis, the kind of meta bit that you do sometimes at a point in almost every essay, whether that comes from your training as a professional woman.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trained to write essays, right? And it is a huge shift for me to stop being an academic and stop using that voice and to use another voice. But the form is really good, right? To essay something, you know? Montaigne was onto something. And that idea that you can trace something through an arc, and you begin somewhere and you stay with that subject, but you're somewhere else by the end. And I think that analytic thing is really important to me, and actually comes through my reading as well of other essayists. So I love, and I realize it's funny when you look and you realize that there are patterns and to the things that you like, and you kind of go, oh, okay, that's a thing. So I love when other essayists acknowledge themselves in their work. So they say, I don't know how to do this often. Great essay writers. I mean, Joan Didion does it. Adrienne Rich does it. She does an incredible essay called Split at the Root, where she was brought up secular, and only in her teenage years did she discover that she was Jewish. And she discovers the whole inheritance that comes with that of identity. And she writes this essay about not wanting to write this essay, needing to do it, but not feeling able to do it. And I read that while I was writing this, and I thought, oh, thank you. What a gift. Okay, I can admit myself, everything from doubt to joy to fear, all of those emotions. And that's not a sign of not being able to write it well. It's actually a sign of being able to tackle the subject properly. I mean, hey, hang on a second. Who in this room has ever written an essay? In school? Come on. Everyone in this room has written an essay of some variety in school. So you know what I'm saying here, which is that we are trained in writing essays to remove ourselves. And the radical act, actually, is to decide as a writer, no, I'm not. I'm going to put myself in it. And that feels really, I love reading it. And so I thought I would try and write like that too.
And writing yourself into it, and not writing as fiction and not writing it under a pseudonym. So you've put yourself out there, and I think one of the things must be the reader response, dealing with the emotion of other people. And how do you deal with that? Because I'm sure you must have got emails and letters.
I get a lot. So I've gone from being a person who never had to deal with other people's emotions, to doing it all the time. And that is the greatest privilege of having written this book. So when it first started, I didn't really know. I hadn't anticipated it. Remember, I thought no one was going to read the book. And then it became a bestseller. So I guess I was wrong. And for only time. So somebody, sorry, I'm making a joke because it's quite a hard question to answer. People started sending me cards and letters and emails talking to me about the things that they connected to in relation to the book. So they might have had a miscarriage. They might have an alcoholic parent or in their family. They might have had experiences with sexual violence. Those are the kind of the big ones that come to me. And originally, I thought I had to try and fix them. I had to try and say the perfect thing in response. And it took me a long time. Nobody can do that, right? There is no perfect thing. It took me a long time to realize, no, they just want to tell somebody. Mm-hmm. It's not about the response. It is about the witnessing. And it is about the sharing. And they are not crazy like me and publishing their stories. They want to do it in a very private, intimate way. And I am hugely privileged that they would share those stories with me. And all I can do is to say, I hear you. I'm really sorry. It's going to be okay.
And that, I mean, I think when we read, I mean, the notes to self, when you talk about all of those experiences you have and that you have had, there is something very consoling also in it, because you lead us into it, but you show us the way back out again.
It's one of the reasons why I wear bright colours, because the book can be depressing, and why it's so lovely that it has this really bright cover, right? Because what's inside can be quite dark. But there is all this light around as well, and all this brightness. And we need both, right? Because the darkness defines the lightness and vice versa. And there is always both. I really have to believe that.
Well, I think you convince us of it as readers.
Well, that was also, I mean, one of the things, in the 5th essay, I write about being a teenager. And I won't talk about it now because for me it's the hardest part of the book. But I write about some really, really difficult experiences when I was a teenager, including eating disorder and sexual violence. And what I wanted to do in writing the book, and I do in that essay, is I say, it was hard, but I'm okay now. And I really am. And I guess if it's about the body, here I am in my body, and I'm good and I'm happy, right?
And you're wearing bright colours.
And I'm wearing bright yellow. And that idea of the writer in relationship to the thing that they have written, being a very, very kind of productive and positive relationship as well, to say, yeah, it's dark, but it's got funny bits as well, you know. Beckett, that's funny, right? So again, that idea of a balance somehow.
And you described yourself earlier, you said, it's not a memoir. I don't want to think of it as a memoir. And then you used the word life writer. And one of the questions is, how do we classify it?
Yeah, it's hard. I use life writing. I originally used creative nonfiction because I think it's really important to acknowledge that in nonfiction we use lots of the strategies of creative writing in order to, and that it is creative, right? That it's constructed always. Essayist, I quite like, but nobody really knows what to do with.
Well, in France.
In
like
France,
essays,
yeah.
though.
So in France, you know everything.
Of course.
This is civilized. In Ireland, they're like, will we put you in biography? Like, yeah. Or under Irish interest, or even better, women's interest, right? Yes. Which is, they are great platforms, and I'm very, very lucky and very, very privileged to be part of. But I never imagined myself in those categories. But it's funny. So one of my favorite nonfiction writers is an American writer called Maggie Nelson. She's an incredible non-memoir called The Argonauts, which is sometimes even filed as fiction. But she has an earlier book about her family called The Red Parts, and because it's about her aunt was murdered before she was born. You're grand. It's filed in true crime. And it's like, okay, she's a poet writing like this incredible, ornate nonfiction, and I'm now being brought to a section of the bookshop I wouldn't ordinarily be in, which actually is a good thing, right? We should explore. I shouldn't be snobbish about the true crime label, I'm not. But it's funny how our reading brings us to places that we didn't think it would. And so Notes to Self, again, I didn't write it with an agenda to be one thing. So it's hard to classify it for me.
Well, I think Emmanuelle said a very interesting thing earlier. She said it's literature. And I think that...
Thank you.
That says it all. Yeah. And I think the other thing that we hear is your voice. And so I'd like to ask your French voice, Marguerite, to talk about being your French voice and how it was.
First of all, I'm not used to speaking in English to an audience because I translate the other way around, you may have noticed. So I apologize in advance for my English, a bit clumsy.
It sounds fine to me.
It's a lot better than my French.
So what was it like to adopt that voice?
It's very humbling, actually, to be here after hearing all that discussion. It's just... this book was very meaningful to me when I first read it. I felt that I heard that voice in my mind, and I heard it in English, of course, and I heard it in French right away. I just thought it's very important that you give language to issues that were never put on the page, and I really don't care about the labels that we put on them. I completely agree with what was said about exploring new dimensions. And so I just felt that I had to translate it because I wanted everybody to read it. Very simply.
And what about the correspondence between the two of you? Were you worried about your French voice? Were you thinking that you were going to be Edith Piaf, or were you worried that you'd be Céline Dion?
I
know she's Canadian.
It just... I'd love to be Canadian. It's such an incredible privilege that somebody would take the time to read the work. It's such an honor. There is no greater compliment, you know? And so I didn't really worry. I was just so delighted. And then we did have a short correspondence about, how the languages speak to each other. And in that, made me realize you were asking questions, and I thought, I hadn't thought of that before. And it makes you see your own work in a different way. So that's hugely exciting.
I was hoping I'd have more questions, because I really like to engage with the writers, and especially when you read a book like Emilie's, you want to know Emilie, you want to meet her. And I was just waiting and thinking, we have a few months before the book is out, and we can actually meet. But there were not many questions, because her prose is very fluid and very direct and very clear and very powerful, and it's you just know exactly she's taking you by the hand and taking you there. So there were not many questions, actually. I wish I had more.
Yeah, let's keep talking. You just send me questions.
Perhaps at this stage we might ask the audience if they might have a question or two for you.
So the question is about writing about alcoholism and how you navigate and negotiate that, I think, as well. Yeah. So again, when I was starting to write that essay, I think probably because of my academic background and because I felt a little bit tentative about only writing about my experience, like that I would have to bring in society in order to kind of prop it up or justify it. And so I had bits in that essay about statistics on alcoholism in Ireland and, kind of general statements about a lot of we as a society need to tackle alcoholism, right? Which we do. we. But we is a tricky word, right? Because who is the we? And you can't actually, as a writer, control that. Or even, unless you're going to spend a lot of time doing it, you can't even really define it. So the only honest thing to do is to only, in my case, in this kind of book, is to use I, not we. And to get rid of the rhetoric, and to get rid of the kind of the social story and stick to my story. And the odd thing, the unexpected thing for me about that is that it, through only talking about my dad and me, it has connected. And so I'm now have written an extra piece for a charity that represents children of alcoholics in Ireland. And that the number of people who said, this is exactly what happened to me. Now, it can't be, right? Because we all have very unique, that's terrible. We all have unique stories. But what it shows is that the emotional realities are often the same. Now, your question about kind of the relationship between trauma and alcoholism is a really important one. And I can't write about that because that would be fiction. I would be imagining myself into my dad's head. And his head is full enough as it is. He doesn't need me in there. I thought, and this is true for the whole book, in terms of, at the end I say, I thank my family and apologize for trespassing on their lives. And what I decided my policy would be in the whole book is that I was entitled to write about my experience. And obviously our lives overlap, so that would include my family. But I couldn't ventriloquize for them, and I couldn't write about their experience as if I knew it, because that would be a kind of theft. And for me, that was where my boundary was. And other writers will be different and will do a really good job of the other thing, but I had to only be me. And part of it as well was to make a break from writing, analysis, objective analysis, and actually to say, well, what happens if you just do the subjective voice? And that is a political thing, I think, as well. I think life writing can be really political for saying, the personal is political. Did I just invent that? But for saying, I'm going to take the personal life really seriously and not have to write about society. But thank you for the question. Good question. I'm just learning what the full answer to that is. But I suspect it is like an extension of what it is like to publish a book in English, which is that there are two books. There is the book that I wrote, which I wrote quietly, privately. Almost nobody, only my family knew that I was writing it, and that I wrote it, 6 o'clock in the morning and 11 o'clock at night, and just for myself. And then there's the book as it exists publicly. And the minute somebody reads it, it belongs to them. And it has taught me a lot about reading, actually, publishing a book, that you give it away. You give your book. It's an object out in the world. And I really mean that. I think that at home we call it my little book, and that it is this little book that has just gone out into the world and done things, and I wish it well. And it's great. It's doing a good job, and that is something that you can't stop, so you have to go with it. but that's what a joy that it would kind of sail off.
Perhaps we could end the evening by hearing your French voice, reading
a
little bit of what you already read for us, so that you can hear what it sounds like.
That would be amazing. So this is the other side to that, which is wow, what an amazing thing, what a gift.
I'm not a reader like you, though, but I hope I'm good foster family for your baby book, your little book. That's what I try to do. I just wanted to add one thing. I was asked before if it was difficult to live with that book for a few months because it's so personal and so harsh in whatever it brings up. But I think, as you've heard now from the person here speaking to you, and the bright colors and the light and everything, it's also a very empowering book. And I felt that it was uplifted by spending all that time with the book. So read it, really. It's not dark. It's full of light. And it's very helpful. Je vais essayer de lire. The same one?
Yeah, just the beginning.
Merci. Oh, I can. Le temps qu'on le trouve, cela fait plusieurs heures qu'il gît dans une petite flaque de sa propre merde. Le centre hospitalier de Corfou est déroutant. Le hall est encombré de patients en train de fumer et il n'y a pas trace d'un bureau d'accueil ou d'information. Je lui envoie un texto pour demander où il est, mais n'obtiens pas de réponse. Dieu sait comment, tel les limiers, nous retrouvons sa trace au 5e étage. Il est alité, affaibli. C'est le soir à présent et il affirme qu'il n'a pas vu d'infirmière ni de médecin depuis midi. Il dit qu'il a besoin d'un bassin. Ma sœur et moi avons voyagé plus de 24 heures et ni l'une ni l'autre n'a dormi. Appelle l'infirmière, je lui réponds. Il dit qu'il l'a fait, mais qu'il ne s'est rien passé. Eh bien, recommence. Il s'empare de la sonnette et appuie frénétiquement. Au bout d'un moment, une infirmière à la mine lasse apparaît en criant après lui, après nous. Je me sens coupable de ne pas parler le grec. Gesticulant en vain, je désigne l'homme dans le lit. J'essaie de signifier qu'il a besoin d'un bassin, d'un brin de toilette, d'un changement de drap. Rien de tout cela ne fait impression. L'infirmière dit quelque chose d'autre, lève les bras au ciel et s'en va. Il nous regarde avec désespoir. Je demande à ma sœur de rester avec lui et sors dans le couloir. Les seules personnes que je vois sont d'autres patients et leurs familles. Je vais au bureau des infirmières, mais il n'y a personne. Alors que je repars, incapable de décider quoi faire, une femme m'interpelle. Comme je ne réponds pas, elle me demande en anglais si ça va, et je me cramponne à elle, lui demande si elle sait où sont les infirmières. Il n'y a pas d'infirmière, me répond-elle. Un homme âgé se penche vers nous. Sans votre famille, ici, vous êtes morts.
So what can I say? Go and buy the book in both English and French.